Like Lois has said, and many of our cousins would say the same thing, there is a special spirit or feeling when you come down here.
Florence McIntire was one of the first cattlewomen of the American West. In 1880, newlyweds Albert and Florence McIntire traveled from Pittsburgh to explore Colorado's San Luis Valley on their honeymoon. They fell in love with the area and purchased 3,000 acres just east of Sanford, Colorado, creating the McIntire Ranch. Albert, a graduate of Yale, found great political success as a Conejos County judge. Albert's responsibilities often took him away from home, leaving Florence to run the ranch by herself. Despite her wealthy East Coast upbringing, Florence was a natural cattlewoman, and the McIntire Ranch flourished. When Albert was elected governor of Colorado in 1895, he moved to Denver, but Florence chose to stay on the land she loved. After the couple divorced in 1898, Florence could have gone back east to live the life of a wealthy socialite. Instead, she continued to operate and grow McIntire Ranch until her death in 1912. Her independence and self-sufficiency are an inspiration. Both Florence and Albert are buried in the cemetery in La Jera, Colorado. The ruins of the beautiful ranch house can still be seen next to Los Ojos Springs, and many of their descendants still reside in the area. With the help of the Sangre de Cristo National Heritage Area, the McIntire Ranch is now listed on Colorado Preservation Inc.'s Endangered Places list and the National Register of Historic Places.
My name is Brent Dyer. My mother was Louise Mortensen. She was a daughter of Helen and Randall Mortensen, Helen McIntire Mortensen.
I'm Rodney Mortensen, Albert Mortensen's son. My middle name's actually Albert, and that was named after Governor McIntire that used to live here. Florence and Albert were coming here on a fishing trip. They were both, one was a Harvard graduate and one was a Yale graduate. They were pretty influential people. And they come here on a fishing trip and they rode the train into La Jera. And then there was a Stewart's Crossing across the Rio Grande over here, and that was the only road. And so they went down there and come over to this spring to fish and fell in love with the place and decided they needed to do whatever they needed to do to try and buy this place. And originally, I believe it was 8,000 acres. I'm not exactly sure if the government owned it, but Grover Cleveland, the President of the United States, signed the deed for this place to them.
My name is Lois Mortensen Miller. I was born and mostly raised in Sanford. My dad is Albert McIntire Mortensen. He was named after the governor who built this house. He loved this ranch. He loved it. When Albert Wills became the governor, he moved to Denver. She did not like Denver. She went up for the inauguration, and then I think she came straight home. And she lived here the rest of her life. There had been some financial concerns with the ranch, and she was able to figure all that out and manage this place where it became very self-sustaining, and she lived here for the rest of her life. I don't know the exact years. I know she died in 1912, but her mother came out and lived with her. Her mother was from New York or wherever, somewhere back east. She came out here and lived with Florence then. But I think the thing is that Grandmother Florence's love for this land was passed down through the generations, and our Grandma Helen seemed to get a big dose of it. She loved it here. And they eventually moved here with their family. And then her children, and she raised 13 kids, they loved it here. Some of them more than others, but our dad was one that loved it. And I think that's why eventually he bought the ranch and we were able to live here for our growing up years. I gathered a bunch of histories a few years ago and kind of put them all together in a book. And I was able to, there was a reporter from Pueblo that came down to interview Florence. And this was in her later years, I'm sure. But there were some wonderful details that he told about her, that she was a very private person. You know, she wasn't the kind that had big get-togethers, stuff like that. She was private. She just wanted to be here. I try to visualize her living here and walking out the door to go feed the chickens and gather the eggs, or the pigs. I mean, she had a herd of cows and she took care of them. I visualize her as, I think she probably kept a pretty tight household, was a very good manager with her money, and yet she was so personally involved with all of it. Personally, from what I know from, it would be her grandkids, that was Florence and Helen. Florence said that Grandma was very stern and quite strict with what they could do and couldn't do. But I think she had a pretty soft heart down deep, and she loved, I mean, she took care of her mother, and she would allow the kids to come down and visit, and they would come for Christmas and things like that. So I think that she was a very disciplined person. I think she was very ambitious, had great ideas. She was creative with her ideas and her ways to get the ranch out of debt. Anyway, she handled it all, and she did it. So I have great admiration for her, even though, of course, I never knew her. And so I sometimes think about her, and I think, I need to be like Florence. I need to handle this like Florence would. I'm looking forward to meeting her someday. Well, Albert became a judge and became involved in politics in Conneaus County. And I guess the thing that's unique about it is they came out here in the middle of nowhere from the east, you know, and everything in the east was just magnificent. And so maybe the idea that they were able to come here, they were able to build this ranch, and he was a judge in the county. They were highly involved in politics, and apparently Florence was involved with women's suffrage and women's rights, and so she's kind of an icon that way. You know, she was just involved in that, and she felt strongly about it. And then the idea of it's such a unique place, a unique home in such a unique surrounding, you know, with the springs here. I mean, that's kind of a unique thing just by themselves, the way the springs are, and they run down into the river. And so it's just such a historical place with kind of historical people. And because they were both involved in their own way in politics, but anyway, just interesting that way.
About 20 years, I think she lived here. They loved the place. There was one letter she talked about overlooking the meadow and seeing deer and wildlife out there, and the water in the springs, and the waterfowl and fish that was involved with that. And she just loved it. What I understand, she was a city person from back east, and it was kind of unusual to come here and fall in love with. I mean, if you look up on the hill and it's sagebrush and not a whole lot, it looked pretty gloom, but she had a vision, or they had a vision of what could be, and fell in love with that vision and made it come to pass. I think they were at least 10-foot ceilings.
I think they must have been, because they would have been above that door.
Yeah.
It's kind of hard to say because the adobes have crumbled so much and filled it up. You can't get the...
You can see a ceiling board in here still.
Oh, yeah.
I'm probably standing on 2 or 3 feet of adobe.
Yeah.
And the ceiling board's still up there 10 feet, so I don't know what the ceilings would have been.
And then the walls went on up. You can see another double fireplace here, which we guess may have been bedrooms right here.
You can see some of baseboard molding here,
Oh,
still intact.
and that shows you how far down that floor
yeah,
is.
this is
Wow.
about the floor level.
Yep.
The amazing thing with adobe, which a lot of people understand, is the insulation factor of it. When it's enclosed, it's
right.
very warm in the winter and cool in the summer.
If this was the master bedroom, which maybe it was, but look at the, I mean, 3 great big windows in this bedroom. It's kind of cool. They wanted to see outside, obviously.
And a fireplace in the bedroom. I mean, I'm sure most of it was for stay warm, but
Yeah.
I'm sure there's some aesthetic value
A
too.
little of the ambience.
Yeah. This over here was the root cellar that I spoke of earlier. Pretty necessary. There was no refrigeration, so built into the ground and pretty thick adobe walls was necessary to keep.
Keep it pretty cool.
Yeah.
Another thing that's kind of interesting to me is if you look at the new boards that have been put here supposedly for stabilization, like this, if you compare that to the old wood, a lot of this is dished. I mean, the quality of the wood is just interesting, because if you look at this right here, I mean, it's really dished, but the ones up above that were the original wood, they are just as straight as can be. The other fascinating thing to me is this foundation. Just imagine the work that went into the foundation. I don't know how long it took to build this place, but it had to be a long time, years, I'm sure.
There was actually sleigh runners found up by the base of the mountain that the archaeologists believe they used to freight the rock down here to build the foundation.
Well, that would make sense. Huh.
But it would take a lot of load of rock to
Oh my word, that's a lot
build
of
this
rocks.
foundation.
Yep. And they did such a meticulous job of the placing of the rocks. I mean, look how flat that is. That's
Yeah.
incredible. They had some quality builders, that's for sure. I wonder how they tied those 3 layers of bricks together, I guess just with mud.
Well, you see some laid crossways once in a while. I think
Kind of a
that's what they were
tie.
talking about, the master bricklayer. There was a deck out here at one time. It wasn't real huge, but it was a deck, and there was this is where the rows of trees were planted evenly spaced in a straight line.
Right here?
Right here.
Huh.
They were all, it made like an L shaped through here.
Huh.
And then one of the pictures, it showed some kind of berries out here in the front. But I can't imagine the amount of effort it took watering by hand
Oh
to
my word.
make all this
They
grow.
had help. They had to have had help.
It has this brick archway over the top of the window,
I
and
love
the wood
that.
cut to fit it. I'm sure that's just the aesthetics.
I'm sure it is.
Yeah.
But isn't that amazing? Just looking at it, I mean, we were thinking about it today, and looking at the old original foundation was built out of the lava rocks that come off of the mountains around here, and there were a lot of them, and they must have had quite a building crew. But just looking at the massive amount of lumber that had to be brought in here, this oak didn't grow here. You know, it had to be brought in, and all the fire brick, and I can't imagine how many adobe brick were built to do this. And so I'm guessing, because they probably were fairly well-to-do and they had the resources to get a good crew in here to build the adobe brick and then to stack it up. And what we have been told is just the construction of this adobe brick is an unusual amount of construction, and probably somebody from that knew a lot about building with bricks was involved in it, because there's 3 layers of bricks in some place, 2 in some place, and it's really fascinating to just look how the bricks are put together and cement, and try to visualize, because there's no pictures of the house when it was actually in its heyday. My sister-in-law did a sketch of just looking at several different pictures. She did a sketch of kind of what the house might have looked like, and it's probably pretty close, but it's fascinating to look at it. But how this gigantic McIntire mansion got here, we don't know for sure. I try to imagine what that would have been like to just come here and see the springs here, and the actual access was from La Jera, and coming from that side of the river, there was a bridge, and that's the way they had to come in the first place. Just imagine the feelings they had as they drove up here and saw the water and said, let's build our house there. And it's such a nice spot. It's a little bit elevated, and just kind of a good view of the water, and must have been pretty exciting. When we were kids living down here on the ranch with my folks, we would come down here, we would play around in the springs. I don't remember fishing very much, but I do remember being down here on frosty mornings duck hunting with my dad and my brothers, and I remember coming down here quite a bit as a kid and walking through the house, and of course more of the house was here at that time. It was, I mean, it has deteriorated so amazing.
And as a kid, I remember there was 4 chimneys, but 8 fireplaces in the house. And I know the house was added on to later in life. There was some concrete poured and a kind of a dining area for the crew that my dad and his brothers and sisters come here when they didn't live here, and would come here and put up hay. And so they had to have a bigger eating area. And so there was a little addition put on it. I think this front porch was replaced. The steps they were wooden originally, and they put concrete in. But to me, it's been standing now for 130, 40 years. It's not really standing too well, but it was amazing construction for the time period, and supplies, and to me, amazing determination. There was remnants of other buildings back behind, told by archaeologists, probably servants' quarters and a barn, and I know there was a couple of bunk beds, and there was no roof or no building there, but you could see the foundation and kind of the outline of the building, and some beds there and different things. But actual buildings, this was the only one. I feel like Florence also found solace here. I think she liked it here. There was a peace here, a feeling, uniqueness about I don't know if it's the landscape, or I can't say why. I think with us it's probably nostalgia because it's family, but I do feel something here, and I think she felt it, and my grandmother felt it, and my dad felt it. I feel that my kids like to come out here.
My favorite memories are, I mean, not so much in the house, but just coming down to the springs. My cousins and I came down one day and were swimming in the springs, and we hadn't brought our swimming suits, but my dad had an aunt. Her name was Elsie, and it's okay to say her name, Aunt Elsie. She patrolled this, and she did not want people messing around down here. So we're out on the bridge as we're swimming, and Elsie rides up on her horse. She was not very happy with us, and we said, yeah, we're Albert's daughters. And I mean, she was okay. She said, well, if you're gonna come down here, just let me know. We rode horses all over when we were kids, all over the ranch. But probably the thing that we did a lot was climb up the hills. Climb the hill. Saddleback was right by our house. I mean, we just go right out the back door and go climb Saddleback. And sometimes after school, I mean, we'd just go out and run up the mountain. And so probably climbing these hills was a little bit of a tradition. I don't know, Rod might think of something else. One tradition we did have, I just thought of it, was we would have our Easter picnics down here. The Easter picnics were instigated by Grandma Helen and Grandpa Randall, and we would have them generally kind of in the same area, but all the cousins would come. There were 65 cousins or something like that, weren't there? Anyway, we would come down here and there was always a water fight. Grandma would dye a big goose egg, and that was the prize egg. I remember that. And we did the Easter egg hunts. We did a big picnic, and Aunt Winona would make baked beans. We loved her baked beans. And just the memories probably of Easter picnics was a big one. We were able to come down with a homeschool group. I was earlier this spring with my daughter and a couple of her daughters and some other kids, and they came down and they rolled up their pants and they walked across the little rock dam there and threw rocks in the springs, and were just fascinated. They didn't want to leave.
It is amazing, and I feel very blessed to. I know my mom and dad ended up losing financially the ranch to bankruptcy, and they didn't care about that. They wanted to raise children and give them an upbringing that really mattered. And I think that goes on to Grandma Helen, and I think Florence did the same thing. It wasn't a financial, here's this buku ranch that we're going to make millions on. It's a quiet, solitude, peaceful, and I think reflects back to our Heavenly Father, the way He intended the earth. I think that growing up the way I did taught me to respect the earth and land and Mother Nature. And I feel really sorry for, lack of a better term, city kids that don't get to experience that. They don't see the grass grow from the dirt, or plant a corn seed and see that grow, and they don't see a fish be born or a newborn fawn, and I think it's a valuable life lesson to be able to witness Mother Nature at work.
I think I have a greater appreciation for history now than I ever did when I was young, but I love this history because it's mine. But I love the history of a lot of different things. And so this is a piece of history and a piece of geography that is really special and unique. And it's worth, trying to take it in and read about it and just learn to appreciate that too.
To be in the position Governor McIntire was in, they had to have some status. They had to have some finance behind them. There's not a lot written about Grandma Florence. You can find quite a bit about Grandpa McIntire, Governor McIntire, but she was so much in the shadow, his shadow, that he couldn't have done what he did without her. And of course, for her she loved this place. This was her sanctuary, her heaven here on earth. She loved it. And that has been passed down to several of our cousins. And Rod and I was talking this morning, that kind of the last generation that had personal experiences here are getting older and starting to leave, pass away. And we hope that there are some of the younger, our children and our grandchildren, that something sparks an interest in them to push forward in trying to get this place more recognized. Well, you know, it seems like the older you get, and I'm getting there, I'll be older soon and can appreciate it even more, I'm sure. But what they went through, you know, we have it so easy. I live in Utah, northern Utah, and I can be here in 10 hours. If she wanted to go to Denver and visit Grandpa Mortensen or McIntire, it was a major trip. And weather and, you know, the conditions, riding in a buckboard or a wagon or horseback all that way, it would take days. You know, how hard was it to get mail back and forth then? How much mail never made it? The older I get, the more I realize how hard of life they had. Because it is a special place to us and our family, but it could be a special place to many, many, many others if they would come and see it and feel the Spirit here.